The light through the kitchen window felt unfamiliar this morning. The coffee maker hummed the way it always had, steady and patient, while the sun slid quietly across the countertop. Outside, a neighbor's sprinkler clicked on and off, a sound so ordinary it barely registered. Inside, something felt different, though it was hard to name. Not wrong, just off. She stood there a moment longer than usual, mug warming her hands, wondering why the morning didn't land the way it used to. Nothing dramatic had happened. No pain, no urgent alarm. Just a subtle sense that her body was asking for a little more attention than she'd been giving it. For many Americans entering their late 50s, 60s, or beyond, mornings can feel like quiet negotiations. You check in with your knees before the stairs. You notice how long it takes your energy to arrive. You listen for the familiar rhythm of your own breath. It's not fear that guides these moments, but curiosity and sometimes a low hum of concern you can't quite place. Her name could have been Linda, or Carol, or Susan. Someone who raised kids, worked hard, kept promises, someone who learned long ago how to push through discomfort and keep going. She'd always been proud of that. But lately, pushing through felt less satisfying than it once had. She remembered how, years earlier, her body felt like a well-tuned car. You turned the key, and it responded. Now it was more like an older engine on a cold day. It still ran, it just needed a gentler start. Later that morning, she folded laundry at the dining table. A sweater she loved seemed snug around the waist, though nothing else had changed. She paused, fingers resting on the fabric, and felt a flicker of annoyance, not at the sweater, but at herself, for noticing. She shook it off. Everyone changes, she told herself. That's just life. And yet, small observations have a way of stacking up when you least expect them to. A hint of tiredness that lingers past lunch. Skin that seems a little drier no matter how much lotion you use. A digestion that doesn't feel as effortless as it once did. None of these moments demand attention on their own. Together, they form a quiet pattern. What many people don't realize is that the body rarely shouts first. It whispers, it sends postcards instead of sirens. According to many studies, internal systems are remarkably patient, adjusting and compensating for years before asking for support. The challenge is learning to hear those early messages without turning them into worries. Think of the body like a busy kitchen during the holidays. There's one central worker who chops, cleans, sorts, and keeps everything moving smoothly behind the scenes. When that worker gets overloaded, the kitchen doesn't explode. It just slows down. Dishes pile up. Timing feels off. The meal still happens, just with a little more mess and a little less ease. In our own lives, that kitchen helper works quietly every day, helping process what we eat, what we drink, and even how we handle stress. When it's supported, we rarely think about it. When it's strained, the signs are often subtle, easily mistaken for just getting older. She sat down in the afternoon, telling herself it was only for a minute. The chair felt more inviting than usual. As she rested there, she thought about how often she'd ignored moments like this, labeling them as laziness or lack of discipline. Now, a softer thought emerged. Maybe this was information, not failure. There's something deeply American about the belief that we should be able to power through anything. Rest later, deal with it tomorrow. But with time comes a different kind of wisdom, the understanding that listening early can be an act of strength. That evening, she poured a glass of water and actually finished it. Not because a rule told her to, but because it felt kind. She stepped outside for a short walk as the sky turned peach and blue, noticing how the air felt cooler than expected. These weren't solutions so much as gestures. Small acknowledgments that her body was still on her side. As she prepared for bed, she caught her reflection in the mirror. Same face, same eyes, but behind them was a new attentiveness. Not anxiety, not obsession, just awareness. The quiet confidence that comes from paying attention without judgment. Sometimes the first chapter of change doesn't begin with answers. It begins with noticing, with allowing yourself to pause in the kitchen light and admit that something feels different, and that different doesn't have to mean doomed. It can mean invited. I had oh. Have you ever noticed how small changes sometimes shift everything? Did they change the beans, or is it just me? The question floated through the kitchen without expecting an answer. The coffee was hot, the mug familiar, the brand the same one she'd bought for years. And yet the first sip landed oddly flatter somehow, missing a note she couldn't quite describe. She took another sip, slower this time, as if attention alone might fix it. The morning carried on as usual. Mail slid through the slot. A delivery truck sighed at the curb. The clock over the stove ticked steadily forward. Still, that small moment lingered. Not as a worry, but as a curiosity. For a long time she'd believed that taste was one of life's dependable pleasures. Coffee in the morning, soup on a cold day, a slice of apple eaten standing at the sink. These were constants, little anchors that made the days feel grounded. When one of them shifted, even slightly, it felt personal. She mentioned it later to her sister on the phone, half joking. "Maybe I'm just tired," she said, brushing it off before it could turn into anything heavier. That's how these conversations often go. Here, she, resin, you're alive and about. A quick laugh. A change of subject. No need to make a thing out of it. But what she noticed, what many people quietly notice, is that the senses are storytellers. They don't deliver speeches, they offer hints, a scent that seems muted, a flavor that feels duller than remembered. Not gone. Just different. She thought back to her childhood kitchen, where smells traveled down the hallway before dinner was even ready. You could tell what was cooking without seeing it. Now, sometimes, she had to lean in closer, take an extra breath. It wasn't alarming, just unfamiliar. According to many studies, our senses are closely tied to how the body processes nutrients and maintains balance. When internal systems are working smoothly, taste and smell often feel vibrant and reliable. When those systems are under quiet strain, the senses may lose a bit of their sharpness, like a radio station drifting just off frequency. A helpful way to picture it is like seasoning a soup. When everything underneath is balanced, a pinch of salt brings out the flavor. When it's not, you can add more and more, and the soup still tastes flat. The issue isn't the seasoning. Have her eye, and prowl, and have her one. It's what's happening deeper in the pot. That afternoon, she went to the grocery store, pushing her cart down familiar aisles. She paused longer than usual in front of the produce, noticing colors she'd rushed past before. The deep green of spinach, the dusty blush on peaches. She realized she'd been choosing food by habit more than interest, grabbing what was easy, what fit into a routine built years ago. So she made one small change. She picked something because it looked good, not because it was on the list. At home, she sliced it slowly, paying attention to texture and smell. It wasn't a grand plan. It was an experiment, and it felt surprisingly satisfying. There's a quiet dignity in tuning back into your senses. It's not about perfection or rules. It's about presence. About letting enjoyment be information, not indulgence. Later that evening, she brewed tea instead of another cup of coffee. She noticed the steam, the warmth, the way the flavor unfolded gently instead of all at once. Her body seemed to respond to the slower pace, as if relieved to be asked rather than pushed. As she settled into the couch with a book, she thought about how often we dismiss these small sensory changes because they don't come with drama. But maybe drama isn't the point. Maybe the body's wisdom lies in its subtlety. Growing older, she realized, isn't just about losing things. Sometimes it's about refining attention, learning to listen more closely, learning to trust that noticing is not the same as worrying. The coffee would still be there tomorrow. Maybe it would taste the same. Maybe it wouldn't. Either way, she felt a little more equipped to meet the day with curiosity instead of judgment, and that felt like progress. The zipper stopped halfway, and she froze. It wasn't dramatic. No snap, no tear. Just a gentle resistance where there hadn't been one before. She stood in the bedroom, early light slipping through the blinds, fingers resting on the small metal pull as if it might explain itself. This story is meant to inform and inspire, not to provide medical advice. The jacket had always been her favorite. Soft lining, deep pockets, the kind of thing you reach for without thinking. She tried again, easing the zipper upward, then let it go. A quiet sigh escaped her, more thoughtful than frustrated. Her first instinct was the familiar one. I must have been indulging too much. Too many dinners out. Too many evenings sitting instead of moving. It was easy to place blame there, on choices that felt controllable and a little shameful. She slipped the jacket off and hung it back in the closet, telling herself she'd deal with it later. But later has a way of bringing clarity instead of comfort. As she moved through the morning, she noticed how her midsection felt fuller, not heavier exactly, just different. Not painful, not alarming, just present in a way it hadn't been before. For many people, changes like this show up quietly. The body redistributes, it holds on differently. And while weight is the obvious explanation we reach for, it's often only part of a much larger picture. She remembered a conversation with a friend who joked about middle-age spread, laughing it off the way people do when humor feels safer than curiosity. But standing there now, she wondered if the phrase oversimplified something more nuanced. According to many studies, the body's internal processing systems play a role in how fluids, nutrients, and energy are managed over time. When those systems slow down or get overworked, the body may respond by holding on to things not out of failure, but out of adaptation. Like a closet that hasn't been reorganized in years, things start to crowd together. A useful way to imagine it is a suitcase packed carefully at first. Everything fits, then life adds souvenirs, habits, stress, convenience. Eventually, closing the zipper requires more effort, not because the suitcase is broken, but because it's carrying more than it used to. She sat on the edge of the bed and laughed softly at herself. The body, she thought, is remarkably honest. It doesn't lie, but it also doesn't accuse. It simply reflects. Instead of skipping breakfast as she'd once done in moments of quiet panic, she made something simple and steady. She ate without distraction, noticing how it felt to slow down. It wasn't a solution. It was a signal to herself that care didn't need to be extreme to be meaningful. Later, she took a short walk around the block. Not to burn anything off, not to fix the jacket situation, but to reconnect with the rhythm of her body in motion. The air felt cool against her face. Her steps found their own pace. There's a cultural reflex to see physical changes as problems to be solved immediately. Tight clothing becomes a verdict. A number becomes a label. But with time comes the understanding that the body is more conversation than courtroom. That afternoon, she went back to the closet and ran her hand along the row of jackets. She chose a looser one, not with resignation, but with acceptance. Comfort, she realized, wasn't giving up. It was choosing to work with herself instead of against her. In the mirror, she looked the same as she always had, familiar, capable, still her. The difference wasn't her shape, it was her response. Less urgency, more listening. Sometimes the body asks for space, not judgment. Sometimes it's inviting us to loosen more than just a zipper, to loosen expectations, old narratives, the habit of being hard on ourselves. She turned off the light and headed out the door, feeling steadier than she had that morning. The jacket could wait. The conversation with her body had already begun. By 2 o'clock, her eyes felt heavier than usual. It wasn't a sudden crash, nothing like the way exhaustion hits after a long run. Just a slow, insistent pull, a tug at the corners of her vision, a quiet insistence that she pause. She rested her head on her hand at the office desk, looking out the window at a maple tree shedding its golden leaves. Fatigue was a tricky companion. Some mornings she felt invincible. Others, it arrived uninvited, lingering past lunch, soft and insistent. It wasn't dramatic, it didn't yell. It simply whispered, "Notice me." And in a life built on schedules and responsibilities, whispers are the easiest things to ignore. Her name could be Diane, someone balancing a part-time job, volunteer hours, and the occasional bridge game with friends. She'd always prided herself on endurance, on showing up, on finishing the day no matter what. But lately, finishing felt different, like running a familiar route only to realize the streets themselves had subtly shifted. Sitting there, she reflected on how often she chalked this feeling up to just getting older. That phrase has a comforting neutrality, almost a shield against curiosity. But she had learned to pay attention to subtler messages, the twinge in her side, the dull ache in her joints, the way her energy ebbed before it should. According to many studies, persistent fatigue can reflect the body's internal systems working harder to keep balance. The liver, digestive system, and metabolism often coordinate behind the scenes, quietly processing what we eat, drink, and experience. When those systems are taxed, the result can be a lingering heaviness, a slow-burning tiredness rather than sudden collapse. Imagine an orchestra. Each musician plays their part perfectly, but the conductor, a bit distracted or overloaded, lets timing drift. The music still plays, but notes feel slightly off, rhythms lag, and a familiar melody feels harder to follow. The same happens inside the body. Subtle inefficiencies ripple through energy levels without ever triggering alarm bells. Later that afternoon, Diane decided to take a brief walk around the office building. She didn't push herself. She didn't push herself. She noticed the crispness of the air, the crunch of leaves under her shoes, the sound of a neighbor's dog barking in the distance. She felt her lungs expand with each breath, felt a gentle pulse of vitality return, not immediately, but gradually. At home, she prepared a simple, nourishing snack. Sliced apples with a bit of peanut butter. Nothing elaborate, nothing forced. The act of caring for herself, even in these small ways, felt like a gentle reassurance. She realized that tending to her body could be a conversation, not a chore. That evening, she sank into her favorite chair with a blanket draped over her knees. The quiet was no longer oppressive. It felt like permission to rest, to listen, to honor the subtle messages she had previously overlooked. For the first time that week, she allowed herself to acknowledge that her energy might not be what it once was, and that was okay. She reflected on how often Americans of her age overlook these early signs, pushing through fatigue, because society equates constant motion with virtue. But awareness, she realized, wasn't surrender, it was empowerment. By noticing, she could make choices that nourished rather than depleted. As the evening light dimmed, she closed her eyes and smiled softly, a small relief washing over her. There was nothing urgent, nothing dire, just an awareness that caring for herself in these quiet moments could make a difference over time. The bright yellow post-it on the fridge caught her eye. It wasn't a reminder for a meeting or a grocery list, just a scribbled note: drink water slowly. She blinked at it, thinking she'd written it herself a few days ago, almost as a joke, almost as a gentle nudge to pay attention. The kitchen hummed quietly around her, the refrigerator's soft hum, the distant chatter of neighbors, the clink of dishes in the sink. Yet that tiny square of paper felt significant, almost symbolic. It reminded her that attention doesn't always need to be dramatic to matter. Even the smallest objects can anchor awareness. Her name might have been Margaret, someone who had spent decades caring for others, children, a partner, parents, often putting her own needs last. She laughed softly, imagining how she had ignored countless signals from her own body, convinced that being busy was synonymous with being healthy. She poured herself a glass of water, noticing its clarity and coolness. Taking a slow sip, she felt the sensation of liquid traveling down her throat, settling in her stomach. It was ordinary. "Hello. I'm delighted to assist you with our voice services. Choose a voice that resonates with you, and let's begin our creative audio journey together." She thought about how easy it had been to overlook something so simple for years: a forgotten sip, a skipped refill, a minor discomfort, and yet how much cumulative effect it could have on her sense of vitality. Later, she took a moment to check the pantry. She rearranged a few items, noticing expiration dates and the texture of familiar foods. It felt like more than tidying. It was a quiet inspection of what she put into her body, a gentle acknowledgement that choices, even small ones, mattered. She started adding small rituals, finishing the water in her glass, refilling it promptly, sipping during television commercials, or while waiting for the kettle to boil. Nothing burdensome, nothing extreme. Just consistent gestures that honored her body's quiet requests. By evening, Margaret found herself reflecting on the post-it note. It wasn't just about drinking water, it was about noticing, about listening, about learning to interpret small signals as invitations rather than annoyances. A sticky note, a sip of water, a brief pause, seemingly trivial acts, yet capable of shaping her day in subtle ways. The thought settled warmly in her chest. Care doesn't have to be dramatic. Attention doesn't have to be monumental. Sometimes the tiniest gestures ripple outward, touching energy, mood, and even a sense of inner balance. As she turned off the kitchen light, she smiled at the yellow square, now glowing faintly in the evening glow. A reminder that the simplest actions done consistently could feel like quiet triumphs. "I'm fine," he said, sitting down again. The words were quick, casual, almost automatic, slipping into the room like a whisper that demanded no response. But she noticed. She always noticed. He was John, a retiree who had spent decades building a career, maintaining a household, and projecting calm confidence. To the world, he appeared steady, dependable. But in that simple phrase, there was a subtle weight, a reluctance to admit that something, however small, felt different. Fatigue, mild discomfort, or just the vague unease of bodies changing with age, he would tuck it away, preferring routine over acknowledgement. They were sitting in the living room, sunlight spilling over a worn armchair, the TV murmuring in the background. His wife, Carol, had asked if he wanted a glass of water. He'd waved her off, muttering the familiar, "I'm fine," a phrase that masked curiosity and concern alike. Yet, she knew better. She had learned that listening carefully often revealed what routine words tried to conceal. Many people do the same. According to various studies, seniors often underreport symptoms or dismiss subtle bodily changes. It isn't stubbornness. It isn't denial. It's a quiet cultural habit. To soldier on, to avoid bothering others, or to normalize the body's whispers as just part of aging. Think of the body as a car in long-term use. It hums along reliably, tires hold air, brakes respond, engine purrs. But over time the small warning lights flicker subtly. A twinge here, a pause there. The car still drives perfectly, but attentive owners notice minor signs before they grow. Saying "I'm fine" is like ignoring the flickering light, trusting it will go away. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. John didn't rush to change his habits. That afternoon, he walked slowly to the mailbox, instead of driving, feeling the cool air brush against his face. It wasn't an obligation or a fix. It was an experiment, a small gesture of attentiveness. Later, he took a glass of water to the couch and sipped deliberately, noticing the simple act of hydration and the way it made him feel more alert, more grounded. There is a quiet wisdom in noticing without panic, admitting curiosity, rather than distress, transforms routine moments into invitations for gentle care. And it's in these small moments, choosing a brief walk, finishing a glass of water, letting the body guide decisions, that people often find empowerment. That evening, he and Carol sat together on the porch, sharing a quiet laugh over a memory from years past. The tension that usually accompanied the day's fatigue had eased. Nothing miraculous had happened. No crisis was averted. Only a subtle shift, awareness, connection, and a willingness to listen. John thought about how often Americans of his age deflect and minimize. The words "I'm fine" had been a shield. But now, paired with action, small acknowledgement, and gentle attention, even a phrase that once hid truth could coexist with curiosity, care, and calm. He leaned back, breathing deeply, noticing the sky turning rose and lavender. Perhaps the first step toward meaningful change wasn't declaring problems, but noticing whispers and honoring them quietly. Her hands lingered over the table, tracing the lines of her palms. The skin felt different today, a touch drier, a little rougher. Subtle changes she hadn't really noticed until this quiet morning. Sunlight pooled across the wood grain, illuminating the tiny flecks and folds, reminding her that even surfaces tell stories. Her name could have been Elon, someone who gardened with care, baked with intention, and spent decades watching life grow in small, deliberate ways. She noticed details others overlooked, the way a leaf curled, the faint scent of morning dew, the texture of her own skin against a soft sweater. Lately, she realized, her skin was whispering, signaling shifts that weren't urgent but deserved attention. Many people, especially as they age, overlook these signs. Skin reflects more than sun exposure or moisturization habits. It often mirrors internal balance. According to numerous studies, hydration, nutrition, and circulation play vital roles in maintaining skin suppleness. Think of it like a canvas. A painter may layer colors, but if the underlying fabric isn't taut and cared for, even the brightest hues appear dull. Helen recalled how, as a young woman, she had rarely considered her hands. They were tools, vehicles for action. But now, she appreciated them as mirrors of her lifestyle. A small spot of dryness here, a subtle discoloration there. Not alarming, but informative nudges from the body asking, "Notice me." She went to the bathroom and ran her fingers gently over her forearms, feeling the faint roughness. She remembered a trick her mother had taught her decades ago. Massage lotion in slow, circular motions, not just for moisture, but for attention. It felt like a mini ritual of care, not indulgent, not obsessive, simply deliberate. Later, she brewed tea and carried it to the porch, watching morning light spill over the garden. The dew glistened on leaves like tiny lanterns. She stretched her arms above her head, noticing how movement warmed her skin, increased circulation, and left a gentle glow. Small actions, she realized, could have a surprisingly cumulative effect. Her reflection wandered to how skin subtly communicates more than age alone. Tiredness, mild dehydration, stress, even diet choices can subtly manifest. The body is rarely dramatic in its alerts. It prefers whispers and gentle nudges, like a leaf brushing against a window pane, asking for attention without raising alarm. By afternoon, Ellen had added another tiny habit, keeping a small bowl of water by her workstation and sipping regularly. Not because she had to, not to correct anything urgently, but because she'd learned that nourishment is a form of conversation with herself, with her body, and with the life she continues to cultivate. As the sun lowered, she examined her hands again. Lines and texture remained, yes, but they now felt like history, narrative, and potential. She smiled softly. Caring for herself didn't demand radical change. It demanded noticing, listening, and small, deliberate gestures that honored both present and future. Skin, after all, tells stories, and sometimes the gentlest attention to the surface can shift the rhythm of the whole day. She lay down, expecting sleep, but it didn't come easily. The sheets were cool, the room quiet, and yet her mind wandered, circling thoughts of tomorrow, errands, small regrets. She closed her eyes, exhaling slowly, but rest felt incomplete, a half-sleep, a pause that didn't quite reset her. Her name could have been Margaret, someone who cherished routine yet struggled with the subtle shifts that often accompany later years. Nights had once been effortless, lights out, eyes closed, and the body folded naturally into rest. Now, she noticed that sleep arrived in fragments, sometimes deep, sometimes shallow, often leaving a residue of lingering fatigue. Many people experience this. According to numerous studies, sleep patterns naturally evolve with age. Circadian rhythms shift, hormonal signals change, and minor disruptions from stress to hydration to diet can ripple into nightly rest. The body still needs sleep, but it doesn't always come as a seamless, restorative wave. A helpful way to imagine it is like charging a battery overnight. Years ago, a full charge might happen in 8 hours, no questions asked. Now, the battery fills intermittently, sometimes reaching only 80% by morning. The device still functions, but performance isn't optimal. Small adjustments can make a difference. Margaret reached for a glass of water by the bedside, sipping slowly. Hydration wasn't a cure, but it supported bodily systems that contribute to restfulness. She adjusted the pillow slightly, noticing how a simple shift in support could relieve tension in her shoulders and neck. Tiny, deliberate gestures mattered more than she had realized. Later, she tried a short breathing exercise. Inhale, exhale, count slowly to 5. Again and again. It wasn't a dramatic intervention. It wasn't a promise of perfect sleep, but it created a rhythm. Her body recognized, a quiet anchor amid the wandering thoughts that often stole rest. She remembered a friend's advice: treat bedtime like an invitation, not an obligation. The phrasing resonated. Sleep wasn't a task to complete, or a benchmark to measure. It was a state to approach gently, with patience, and with attention to signals both mental and physical. As the night deepened, Margaret felt a subtle shift. Not exhaustion, not relief, but awareness. She adjusted the blanket, listened to the distant hum of traffic, and realized that even fragmented sleep could be a space of connection with her body, a moment to honor cycles and rhythms rather than resist them. By morning, she woke with a gentler sense of presence. The fatigue lingered slightly, yes, but alongside it was a sense of empowerment. She had engaged with her own system thoughtfully, quietly, and respectfully, and sometimes that attention mattered more than any number on a clock. Sleep, she reflected, isn't always about duration. It's about noticing the quality of rest, honoring patterns, and practicing small rituals that allow the body to feel supported and heard. The smell of barbecue drifted across the yard before anyone could see the grill. Laughter followed, light and familiar, carrying the sound of children running between sprinklers and adults exchanging stories over paper plates. She inhaled, feeling the warmth of sun on her shoulders, and noticed something subtle: the way her appetite and energy seemed to fluctuate with the feast before her. Her name could have been Carol, someone who loved hosting weekend barbecues, whose house was always open to friends and family. She had always taken pride in creating spaces where people felt welcome, where conversation flowed as freely as the lemonade. But in recent months, she had begun noticing a slight heaviness after meals, a sluggishness she hadn't paid much attention to before. Many Americans encounter this. According to multiple studies, digestion, liver function, and metabolic efficiency subtly change over time. It's not dramatic or dangerous in most cases, but the body communicates through minor shifts, energy dips, bloating, or fatigue after foods that once caused none. It's like a well-tuned orchestra adjusting to a new conductor. The music still plays, but the tempo feels slightly different. Carol stepped back from the grill for a moment, observing the table. Burgers, corn on the cob, a bowl of fresh fruit, drinks lined up in colorful rows. She smiled, realizing she didn't need to overhaul the menu or forbid favorite foods. Small, mindful choices could create balance without taking away enjoyment. She decided to try a gentle approach. Instead of piling a plate with multiple items at once, she served herself smaller portions, savoring each bite. She added a colorful salad she'd prepared earlier, noting the crunch of lettuce and the bright sweetness of tomatoes. Each bite became an act of curiosity rather than obligation, an experiment in paying attention. Later, she suggested a short walk around the yard with a few friends. The conversation flowed easily, and the simple act of moving slow, steady, and social lightened the heaviness she had noticed earlier. Exercise didn't have to be formal or extreme to make a difference. Even a gentle stroll could help her body process the meal and reset energy levels. Carol realized something important. Moderation didn't mean deprivation. Mindfulness didn't mean obsession. It meant noticing what made her feel good, both in the moment and afterward, and choosing actions that supported enjoyment while honoring her body's subtle messages. By the time the sun started to dip behind the trees, she felt a quiet satisfaction, not just from the food or the company, but from attending to herself in small, deliberate ways. She had learned that listening to signals and adjusting gently could allow her to fully enjoy life's pleasures without the lingering slump that once followed. As she cleared a few dishes, she thought about how many small, consistent habits, sipping water between bites, moving after meals, savoring flavors, could ripple into lasting energy and well-being. She smiled at the realization that even in the midst of celebration, small changes mattered. The mailbox was empty, except for a single, thin envelope that seemed almost out of place. She held it in her hands a moment longer than usual, feeling the subtle texture of the paper, the slight weight that suggested someone had thought enough to write rather than type. The handwriting was familiar, a friend she hadn't seen in months, but it was the act itself that lingered in her mind. Her name could have been Diane, a retired teacher who had spent decades nurturing young minds and caring for family. She had grown accustomed to structure, to routine, and to the comfort of things running on schedule. Yet, lately, she found herself noticing smaller details more often. A creak in the kitchen floor, a gentle tightness in her shoulders, a fleeting wave of fatigue mid-morning. The envelope in her hand became a symbol of attention, of noticing life's subtleties before they slip by. Many people in their 60s and beyond experience shifts that don't scream for attention but whisper persistently. According to multiple studies, as metabolism slows and organs like the liver and digestive system adjust over time, even minor lifestyle changes can ripple through energy levels, digestion, and overall vitality. Like a quiet engine in need of maintenance, subtle inefficiencies creep in long before the body asks for help. She opened the envelope and read the note aloud to herself. "Thinking of you, hope you're finding time to rest and enjoy." The words resonated more deeply than she expected. It wasn't advice or critique. It was a gentle invitation to pause and reflect. She realized she had been running through days on autopilot, skimming moments rather than savoring them, and that small pauses could shift her experience entirely. After reading the note, she walked slowly to the kitchen, pouring herself a cup of tea. The steam rose, curling around her fingers, a quiet warmth that invited mindfulness. Each sip became a tiny meditation, a conversation with herself. She noticed flavors, temperature, texture sensations, often overlooked in the rush of daily life. These simple attentions weren't dramatic solutions. They were gestures that honored her body and mind simultaneously. Later, she decided to reorganize a small shelf in the living room. Books that had collected dust were stacked with intention. Photos of past vacations were rotated forward. It was a minor act, but it offered a tangible sense of control and care. Her environment, she realized, mirrored her internal state. Subtle changes in organization and attention to detail could create a sense of order and calm that her body and mind quietly appreciated. Diane also incorporated a brief walk in the late afternoon, moving deliberately around her block. The air smelled faintly of pine and damp earth. Birds called from distant trees. Her steps were unhurried, and she let herself notice the sensations in her feet, calves, and back. Simple movement, consistent yet gentle, became an act of respect for her body's needs. That evening, she prepared a light meal, roasted vegetables and a small portion of lean protein. Rather than rushing, she cooked slowly, stirring each pan with attention, savoring the smells, textures, and colors. She realized that nutrition wasn't just about calories or rules, it was about connection. Connection to taste, to energy, and to self-care. Even small changes in preparation and choice had tangible effects on how she felt physically and emotionally. By bedtime, Diane felt a quiet shift. She was still herself, same routines, same body, but there was a new layer of attentiveness, a sense that small gestures, small pauses, and minor adjustments weren't trivial. They were part of a larger conversation between her and her body, between her mind and the rhythm of her days. As she tucked herself into bed, she thought about the envelope, the walk, the tea, the meal, and realized something profound. Life's richness often lives in the small details, the unassuming acts of care, and the willingness to notice. It wasn't about overhauling her life, it was about gentle consistency, about listening, and about allowing tiny changes to ripple into larger shifts of energy, clarity, and well-being. She drifted into sleep, thinking about tomorrow not with urgency, but with curiosity. Even the quietest signals, if noticed and honored, could create momentum that changed everything. The morning light fell softly on the kitchen counter, highlighting a single coffee cup left from the night before. It was ordinary, unremarkable, and yet it caught her attention more than she expected. The rim had a faint stain. The inside still held the faintest trace of yesterday's brew. She picked it up, feeling its warmth, the smooth ceramic against her fingers, and wondered how many mornings she had begun without noticing such simple details. Her name could have been Linda, a grandmother who spent her days balancing volunteer work, caring for her home, and occasionally babysitting her grandchildren. She had always moved quickly, rarely pausing, always focused on the next task, the next call, the next obligation. But in recent months, she had begun to notice small shifts, tiny dips in energy after lunch, brief moments of lightheadedness in the late afternoon, the way her body seemed to ask for attention before she had even realized it. These subtle changes are common among seniors. According to multiple studies, the liver plays a critical role in metabolizing nutrients, processing toxins, and regulating energy balance. When the liver's function shifts slightly over time, the effects may be gentle but persistent. Fatigue, bloating, mild digestive discomfort, or subtle changes in how the body responds to foods and drinks. It doesn't scream for attention, but it quietly nudges, asking for mindfulness and care. Linda washed the cup slowly, letting the warm water run over her hands. She noticed the lingering aroma of coffee, the shape of the cup, the smoothness of the countertop. Ordinary acts like washing a dish suddenly felt like acts of presence, small, deliberate gestures that reminded her she could engage with her body and surroundings intentionally rather than automatically. She prepared breakfast mindfully, slicing fresh fruit, toasting whole grain bread, and adding a soft spread of almond butter. She chewed slowly, savoring texture, sweetness, and warmth, noticing how the meal made her feel, how her energy shifted from the first bite to the last. Eating became less about fueling her body mechanically and more about engaging with its responses, noticing subtle signals, and adapting in real time. Later, she decided to tackle the small garden behind her house. The soil was damp, the smell of earth rich and grounding. As she pulled weeds, planted seeds, and watered young sprouts, she noticed the way bending and stretching gently moved her muscles and joints, how circulation warmed her hands and arms, and how the activity itself seemed to connect her body and mind in a subtle but satisfying rhythm. Gardening, she realized, wasn't just a hobby, it was a conversation with herself and with life. In the afternoon, she paused for a glass of water, letting it flow slowly, deliberately, noticing how it refreshed her throat and cooled her mouth. She thought about how many times hydration had been an afterthought, yet how essential it was to energy, digestion, and overall well-being. Even a small habit, sipping water consistently, could ripple outward, affecting mood, focus, and vitality over time. Later still, she reflected on a recent walk with her daughter. They had strolled through a local park, noticing the changing colors of leaves, the faint rustle of squirrels, and the distant laughter of children. Linda had felt light, energized, connected. The body responded not just to nourishment, but to movement, sensory engagement, and small doses of sunlight. It was all connected, an intricate web of subtle signals demanding only a little attention to yield noticeable results. As evening approached, she prepared a simple dinner, a vegetable stir-fry with a small portion of lean protein. She chopped, stirred, and tasted slowly, noting textures, smells, and flavors. She realized that attention was the common thread of her day, noticing energy, taste, movement, hydration, rest, and the smallest details of her environment. Each acted like a pebble dropped into water, sending ripples through her entire day. By bedtime, Linda felt a gentle sense of accomplishment. Nothing dramatic had changed, but the small attentions had created a subtle shift in energy and presence. She lay down, recalling the cup, the garden, the walk, the meals, small rituals that collectively reminded her of the power of listening to her body, of valuing incremental steps over drastic interventions. Life, she reflected, often whispers rather than shouts. It rewards those willing to notice the subtle nudges, the quiet messages that accumulate over time. Even modest changes, slowing down, sipping water, walking a little further, savoring a meal, could create a cascade of well-being that felt profound, precisely because it was gentle, patient, and consistent. As the room darkened, she smiled softly, thinking about the ripple effect of her day. It wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about grand gestures. It was about attention, presence, and the gentle accumulation of mindful choices. Tomorrow, she would notice again, and perhaps the world would feel just a little brighter for it. The wind carried the scent of rain before the clouds even appeared. She paused at the doorway, feeling the cool air brush her cheeks, a mixture of anticipation and relief settling over her. The sky was a soft gray, and the subtle chill made her grateful for the warmth of her sweater. There was nothing urgent about this moment. Yet, in its stillness, it felt significant, a gentle reminder that life often speaks in whispers rather than shouts. Her name could have been Susan, someone who had spent decades navigating the ebbs and flows of family, work, and personal goals. She had seen routines repeat, patterns solidify, and her body slowly remind her that it, too, was part of the ongoing story. Lately, she had become attuned to subtler signals. Fatigue after minor exertion, moments of mild digestive discomfort, fleeting lapses in focus. Nothing alarming, nothing dramatic, yet persistent enough to demand attention. Susan had learned to pause, to notice, and to interpret these subtle nudges. Many seniors experience similar signals. According to multiple studies, the liver is a central player in metabolism, detoxification, and energy management. Over time, its efficiency may shift. The body's gentle reminders, tiredness after meals, subtle bloating, or changes in digestion, are invitations to engage thoughtfully with nutrition, movement, and self-care. Imagine a small boat navigating a river. Years ago, currents were predictable, and the boat glided smoothly. Over time, minor shifts in the riverbed unseen until noticed require adjustments. A paddle stroke here, a slight turn there. The journey continues, but attentiveness is essential. Life, like that river, demands subtle guidance to stay balanced. and energized. That afternoon, Susan decided to take a slow walk around the neighborhood. Leaves clung to branches, droplets from an earlier drizzle sparkled in the fading sunlight. Each step became an opportunity to notice the rhythm of her own body, the flex of ankles, the movement of hips, the steady beat of her heart. The exercise wasn't about performance or calories. It was about tuning into herself, observing how minor actions ripple through energy and well-being. Afterward, she prepared a simple, nourishing meal: roasted vegetables, a small piece of salmon, and a handful of quinoa. Each ingredient reminded her of past lessons: the importance of protein for muscle maintenance, fiber for digestion, and colorful produce for nutrients. She cooked slowly, appreciating textures, smells, and tastes, transforming a routine task into a moment of mindfulness. Eating became more than sustenance. It was a way to honor her body's evolving needs. Later, Susan sat on the porch with a glass of water, reflecting on the small rituals of her day. The water refreshed her throat and energized her in subtle ways. She realized that attention to hydration, movement, and nutrient-rich foods, though seemingly minor individually, collectively created a steady foundation for energy, mood, and clarity. Each small action was a conversation with her body, a recognition that listening mattered more than urgency. She recalled moments from the past week: the morning tea, the brief stretches, the walk after lunch, the mindful dinner. Each habit had required minimal effort but had created noticeable shifts in her vitality. It was a quiet revelation: the compounding effect of consistent, gentle attention could surpass any dramatic intervention or fleeting fad. As evening fell, Susan reflected on the philosophy she had begun to embrace. Life isn't about perfection, speed, or immediate fixes. It's about noticing the whispers, responding with kindness, and accumulating small, meaningful actions over time. She thought about her liver, digestion, energy, and sleep, all interwoven systems that thrived when met with patience and awareness. The wind picked up slightly, carrying the scent of wet earth. She breathed deeply, savoring the moment. Change didn't need to be loud or abrupt. It could be subtle, soft, and deliberate, like the drip of rain nourishing soil over time. Susan smiled, understanding that the real power of health, energy, and well-being lay not in extreme measures but in the accumulation of mindful choices, repeated gently and consistently. By bedtime, she felt calm, connected, and quietly empowered. There was no urgency, no panic, just presence, awareness, and a deep sense of continuity with herself. She realized that these small acts of care, repeated day after day, were the true foundation of vitality. She turned off the porch light and watched the raindrops glitter faintly in the streetlights, thinking, life rewards the patient observer, the gentle caregiver, the one who notices and responds, even in small ways. And sometimes, those small ways shift everything. The creak of the wooden floor greeted her as she stepped into the old study. Dust motes floated lazily in the shafts of sunlight, catching the light like tiny stars suspended in air. She ran her hand over the edge of the desk, feeling the smooth, worn wood beneath her fingers, and for a moment, she felt a connection to the decades of life that had passed within this room. Her name could have been Eleanor, a retired librarian who had spent a lifetime surrounded by books, stories, and the quiet rhythm of pages turning. The study had always been a sanctuary, a place of reflection and discovery, but lately she noticed subtle changes in her body: occasional fatigue, slight bloating after meals, and an underlying sense of stiffness that hadn't been there before. It wasn't alarming, but it demanded attention. Many seniors experience these nuanced shifts. According to multiple studies, the liver, while resilient, gradually adapts to years of diet, lifestyle, and environmental factors. Energy metabolism may fluctuate. Digestion can slow, and nutrient absorption becomes slightly less efficient. The body speaks softly through tiredness, mild digestive discomfort, or a fleeting sense of heaviness rather than through urgent alarms. Eleanor settled into a chair, noticing the fabric's texture beneath her fingers. She allowed herself a few moments to breathe, to feel the subtle rise and fall of her chest, and to reflect on how small adjustments in daily routines could ripple outward into improved well-being. She realized that awareness itself, paying attention to these subtle signals, was the first step toward gentle empowerment. She decided to revisit an old practice she had once cherished. Journaling. Taking a fresh notebook, she wrote down small observations: how her energy felt after breakfast, the texture of her skin in the morning, the mood shifts she experienced during quiet afternoons. Writing became more than record-keeping. It became a dialogue with herself, a chance to notice patterns that might otherwise go unacknowledged. Next, Eleanor turned her attention to hydration. She filled a glass with cool water and drank slowly, savoring the sensation as it traveled down her throat. Many people underestimate the impact of hydration, yet studies suggest it supports digestion, circulation, and the body's natural detoxification processes, functions in which the liver plays a central role. Drinking water, she realized, was an act of attentiveness, a simple gesture that subtly reinforced her body's daily rhythms. Later in the afternoon, she chose to move gently. Instead of pushing herself through vigorous exercise, Eleanor took a slow walk around the backyard. The soft grass pressed against her shoes, the sunlight warmed her shoulders, and the slight exertion made her muscles hum without strain. Each step reminded her that movement wasn't a chore. It was an ongoing conversation with her body, a way to maintain circulation, flexibility, and vitality over time. Eleanor also reflected on nutrition. She prepared a small meal, focusing on colorful vegetables, lean protein, and whole grains. The act of chopping, stirring, and tasting became meditative. She noticed how each bite made her feel more alert, more energized, more attentive. According to research, these subtle dietary choices cumulatively influence liver function, energy levels, and overall wellness. It wasn't about perfection or rigid rules, it was about respect and mindfulness. By evening, she returned to her study, glancing over the bookshelf filled with memories, knowledge, and history. She realized that the habits she had revisited, journaling, hydration, mindful movement, and thoughtful nutrition, were tiny acts with disproportionately large effects. They reminded her that health wasn't about dramatic interventions, but about consistency, attention, and small gestures repeated over time. The wind rustled the trees outside, carrying the faint scent of damp earth. Eleanor sat quietly, reflecting on the power of noticing, listening, and responding. She understood that the liver, the body, and even the mind thrived when met with patient care. Subtle awareness, she thought, was a form of empowerment, a reminder that she was an active participant in her own well-being. As the day closed, Eleanor felt a gentle sense of satisfaction. The study, the notebook, the water, the meal, and the walk were more than routines. They were anchors of presence, deliberate actions that connected her body, mind, and environment. Life, she understood, was a tapestry woven from small, consistent acts. She blew out the lamp, leaving only the soft moonlight spilling across the desk. Eleanor smiled, thinking, every tiny choice, a sip of water, a short walk, a mindful meal, a moment of reflection, had the power to ripple through her life, shifting energy, mood, and perspective in ways that felt profound precisely because they were small. The scent of fresh bread drifted from the kitchen, warm and comforting, curling into the corners of the small dining room. She paused at the doorway, noticing the golden crusts resting on the cooling rack, the steam rising like a gentle invitation. It was an ordinary moment, yet it carried a quiet sense of significance. The act of baking, kneading, folding, waiting had become a form of meditation, a way to connect with herself and the rhythms of her day. Her name could have been Margaret, a retiree who had spent decades nurturing family and community alike, often putting the needs of others before her own. But in recent months, she had begun noticing subtle signs in her body: lingering fatigue after simple chores, occasional digestive discomfort, a twinge of heaviness in her stomach after meals she once considered ordinary. These whispers weren't alarming, yet they demanded acknowledgement. Many seniors encounter similar experiences. According to multiple studies, liver function gradually adapts to the cumulative effects of age, diet, and lifestyle. Energy metabolism shifts, detoxification processes may slow slightly, and digestion requires more attentive care. These small changes aren't emergencies, they are signals, gentle nudges from the body, inviting observation, adjustment, and compassion. Margaret leaned over the counter, kneading dough with deliberate attention. The texture, elasticity, and warmth under her palms grounded her in the present moment. Baking, she realized, wasn't just about food. It was an exercise in mindfulness, a way to honor her senses, her rhythm, and the quiet needs of her body. Each fold and press of the dough reminded her that small, consistent effort could produce results far greater than the sum of its parts. She poured herself a glass of water, noticing its cool clarity. Hydration, she thought, was deceptively simple yet vital. Studies suggest that consistent water intake supports liver function, digestion, and circulation, subtle but powerful contributors to energy and well-being. Drinking slowly, savoring each sip, became an act of attention and care, a ritual that reinforced her awareness of bodily needs. Later, Margaret carried the bread to the table and served a slice to herself. She ate slowly, noticing textures, warmth, and flavor. She reflected on how she often rushed meals, consuming without mindfulness. But now, every bite was an exercise in observation, noticing how her body responded, how her energy shifted, how simple nourishment could influence mood, digestion, and vitality. After breakfast, she decided to take a short walk through her garden. The sun was soft, filtered through early spring leaves, and the air smelled faintly of soil and new growth. Each step awakened muscles and joints, improving circulation and flexibility without strain. The walk became a dialogue with her body, noticing tension, appreciating ease, acknowledging limitations, and celebrating capabilities. Even brief, gentle movement offered measurable benefits when done consistently. Margaret also reflected on her broader routine. Simple acts like meal preparation, short walks, and hydration weren't isolated. They created a rhythm that supported her body's natural processes. Like a well-maintained instrument, each practice reinforced the others. Mindful eating supported digestion, hydration aided energy, movement enhanced circulation. These small, interconnected habits had an outsized influence on her vitality and sense of well-being. As the afternoon sun warmed her kitchen, Margaret prepared a light lunch, fresh vegetables, a small portion of protein, and a sprinkle of herbs. Cooking became an art of attentiveness, noticing colors, smells, and textures. She realized that caring for herself didn't require dramatic changes or complex routines. It required presence, consistency, and small, deliberate choices repeated over time. By evening, she felt a gentle satisfaction, a subtle energy that hadn't been there in previous weeks. The acts of the day, baking, drinking water, walking, eating mindfully, had compounded in unexpected ways. Margaret understood that the quiet accumulation of these behaviors could shift her vitality, mood, and outlook far more than any single intervention. She sat on the porch with a warm cup of tea, watching the sky shift into soft hues of pink and purple. The wind rustled leaves, carrying the scent of flowers and damp earth. Margaret smiled, reflecting on how small, intentional choices observed, respected, and repeated created a life imbued with energy, presence, and calm empowerment. The ticking of the old grandfather clock filled the quiet living room, each chime echoing softly through the space. She sat in her favorite armchair, the worn leather cool beneath her fingertips, and let the rhythm of time anchor her thoughts. It wasn't the kind of clock that demanded attention, but rather one that reminded her that even subtle moments could hold significance if only noticed. Her name could have been Helen, a retired nurse who had spent decades caring for others. She was accustomed to observing details, subtle signs in patients, small changes in routines, tiny shifts in behavior. Lately, she found herself observing her own body with similar attentiveness. Brief bouts of fatigue, mild digestive irregularities, and moments when her energy dipped unpredictably. Nothing alarming, but enough to prompt reflection. Many seniors experience these gentle nudges from their bodies. According to multiple studies, liver function and overall metabolic processes can shift gradually over time. Digestion may slow, detoxification efficiency may fluctuate, and subtle imbalances in energy levels often appear. The body rarely shouts. It whispers. Recognizing these whispers and responding thoughtfully is a critical step toward maintaining wellness. Helen poured herself a glass of water and sipped slowly, appreciating the cool clarity. Hydration, she reflected, was deceptively simple but profoundly influential. Water supports digestion, circulation, and metabolic efficiency, including the liver's role in processing nutrients and clearing waste. Even small, consistent intake can ripple outward, subtly influencing energy and mood throughout the day. Later, she prepared a light breakfast: scrambled eggs with fresh herbs, whole grain toast, and a slice of avocado. She ate slowly, savoring flavors, textures, and warmth. Every bite became an opportunity to notice her body's responses: alertness, digestion, satisfaction. Helen had learned that mindful eating, paying attention to the act of nourishing herself, was more powerful than she had once realized. By mid-morning, she moved to her small garden. The earth was damp from a recent rain, and the air smelled faintly of growth and renewal. Helen dug gently, planting seeds and tending young shoots. The movement wasn't strenuous, but it awakened muscles, improved circulation, and offered a subtle boost of energy. Each bend and stretch became a dialogue with her body, listening, responding, adjusting. Helen also reflected on her routines. Small, intentional actions, hydration, mindful meals, gentle movement, worked together like instruments in a symphony. Individually, they were modest. Together, they created harmony that supported energy, digestion, and overall vitality. She thought of it like tending a garden. Consistent attention to small details yielded cumulative results that were greater than the sum of their parts. In the afternoon, Helen decided to engage her mind as well. She picked up a book she had been meaning to read for weeks. Sitting by the window, she let the sunlight warm her shoulders, immersing herself in the words and ideas. Mental engagement, she noticed, carried subtle physical benefits: alertness, clarity, and a sense of connection between mind and body. Even simple, enjoyable activities contributed to her overall sense of well-being. As evening approached, Helen prepared a small dinner of roasted vegetables and grilled chicken, incorporating herbs and spices that delighted her senses. She moved slowly, savoring textures and aromas, and noticed the subtle lift in energy as she ate. Nutrition, she realized, was not just about sustenance. It was a form of communication with her body, a way of acknowledging its needs and supporting its ongoing function. By nightfall, Helen sat once more in her armchair, sipping a cup of chamomile tea. The clock ticked steadily, a comforting reminder of the passage of time and the rhythm of life. She reflected on the day. Small gestures, repeated with attention and consistency, had created a gentle shift in her energy, mood, and sense of presence. She understood that wellness was rarely about dramatic change. It was about noticing, responding, and nurturing with patience and care. The wind rustled outside, carrying the faint scent of rain and earth. Helen smiled softly, feeling calm, empowered, and present. She realized that small, deliberate actions, hydrating, moving, eating mindfully, engaging her mind, compounded quietly, creating shifts that were profound precisely because they were gentle, consistent, and sustainable. The morning sun streamed through the half-open blinds, casting stripes of light across the kitchen floor. She paused at the sink, feeling the warmth on her arms and the quiet hum of the house waking around her. The kettle hissed softly on the stove, steam curling upward like a gentle reminder to slow down and notice. There was nothing urgent about this morning, yet it carried a kind of significance she hadn't recognized before. Her name could have been Joyce, a retired accountant who had spent decades immersed in numbers, spreadsheets, and deadlines. Precision had always been her strength, but now she found herself measuring a different kind of balance, the subtle rhythms of her own body. Over the past months, she had noticed minor changes, small dips in energy, moments of digestive discomfort, and a lingering sense of heaviness after meals. Nothing dramatic, but enough to make her reflect. Many seniors experience similar cues. According to multiple studies, liver function evolves gradually with age. Its role in metabolism, detoxification, and energy balance is critical, and even slight inefficiencies can manifest as fatigue, bloating, or digestive shifts. These signs are whispers rather than alarms, gentle prompts, inviting awareness and small, thoughtful adjustments. Joyce poured herself a cup of tea, feeling the warmth seep into her hands. She inhaled the fragrant steam, appreciating the ritual itself. Hydration, she thought, was deceptively simple but essential. Water supports liver function, digestion, circulation, and overall energy levels. Sipping slowly, with attention, transformed an ordinary act into an intentional dialogue with her body, a reminder that small gestures can carry profound impact. After breakfast, she decided to tend her backyard garden. The soil was soft from recent rain, earthy and rich beneath her fingers. As she bent and stretched, planting new seedlings and pruning older plants, she noticed subtle shifts in her body, muscles waking, joints loosening, and a quiet surge of energy moving through her. Even gentle movement, repeated regularly, reinforced circulation, flexibility, and overall vitality. Joyce also reflected on nutrition. She prepared a light lunch with fresh vegetables, whole grains, and a small portion of protein. Each bite became an opportunity to engage with taste, texture, and aroma, not in the rush of habit, but with mindful attention. According to research, these small choices collectively influence liver function, digestion, and long-term energy. She realized that consistent, thoughtful nutrition mattered far more than rare indulgent interventions. Later, she dedicated time to a hobby she had neglected, watercolor painting. The brush strokes, the blending of colors, the gentle focus on form and detail, engaged her mind and body in tandem. Mental stimulation, she noticed, supported her energy and mood as subtly as movement or diet. Even simple pleasures, when observed and enjoyed, had tangible effects on well-being. As afternoon turned to evening, Joyce prepared a small, nourishing dinner. She moved deliberately, chopping vegetables, stirring ingredients, and tasting slowly. The process became meditative, reinforcing a sense of care and attention. She understood that wellness wasn't about grand gestures. It was the accumulation of small, mindful actions repeated, observed, and appreciated. By nightfall, Joyce sat in her favorite chair by the window, sipping chamomile tea, watching the sky darken in shades of deep purple and indigo. The house was quiet, except for the soft hum of life in the distance. She reflected on her day, small habits, hydration, mindful meals, gentle movement, creative engagement, had compounded into a noticeable shift in energy, mood, and focus. She realized that the power of attention lay in its consistency. Each subtle act of care, repeated day after day, became a foundation for long-term vitality. Life, she understood, didn't require dramatic overhauls. It required observation, patience, and small, deliberate gestures that ripple outward quietly but meaningfully. Joyce inhaled deeply, savoring the faint scent of rain on the evening air, feeling grounded and empowered. The day had passed gently, yet its impact was profound proof that small choices, made mindfully, can create lasting change. The aroma of cinnamon and toasted nuts floated through the air, drifting from the kitchen to the living room where she sat quietly. She inhaled slowly, letting the scent stir memories of holidays past, of laughter and warmth, and of moments she had once overlooked. Even ordinary smells could feel profound when noticed fully, she realized. There was a softness in the morning, a quiet pause between routine and reflection. Her name could have been Carol, a retired nurse practitioner who had spent decades guiding patients through the subtleties of health and healing. Now, she turned her own attention inward, noticing shifts that had gone unobserved for years. Subtle fatigue after simple tasks, occasional digestive heaviness, and minor lapses in mental clarity. They weren't alarming, but they demanded respect and awareness. Many seniors encounter these gentle reminders from their bodies. According to multiple studies, liver function naturally evolves with age. Its role in detoxification, energy regulation, and nutrient metabolism means that even small inefficiencies can manifest as mild fatigue, bloating, or changes in digestion. These are not crises. They are whispers, subtle prompts for mindfulness and small adjustments. Carol poured herself a cup of warm herbal tea, feeling the steam kiss her fingertips. Hydration was simple but vital, supporting circulation, digestion, and liver function. Each mindful sip became a ritual, a deliberate act of self-care. Even ordinary routines, drinking water, brewing tea, or savoring a meal, could ripple outward, influencing energy, mood, and clarity in meaningful ways. After breakfast, she walked to her small garden. The soil was damp and fragrant from overnight dew. She knelt gently, planting a few new herbs and tending the older ones. Every motion bending, stretching, digging awakened muscles and joints, promoting circulation and subtle energy shifts. The rhythm of gardening, slow and deliberate, reminded her that movement didn't need to be strenuous to be profoundly beneficial. Carol also focused on nutrition. She prepared a light, colorful lunch of roasted vegetables, lean protein, and whole grains. She noticed textures, aromas, and flavors, allowing herself to slow down and eat with attention. According to research, the liver responds positively to consistent, nutrient-rich choices, and small dietary habits repeated over time have cumulative effects on energy, digestion, and overall vitality. In the afternoon, Carol revisited an old practice she had loved: journaling. She wrote about her experiences, thoughts, and subtle shifts in energy. Recording small details helped her recognize patterns, track improvements, and notice responses to minor adjustments in diet, movement, and rest. Journaling wasn't just reflection, it was a form of communication with herself, an intimate dialogue that encouraged attentiveness and self-awareness. Later, she engaged in a brief stretching routine. She moved slowly, paying attention to her breath and the subtle sensations in her body. Each stretch reminded her that gentle, mindful movement was more than exercise. It was maintenance, tuning her body like a well-loved instrument. Over time, these small actions maintained strength, flexibility, and energy in ways that felt cumulative rather than immediate. As evening approached, Carol prepared a simple dinner, using the herbs she had tended earlier in the day. The act of cooking became a meditation, a practice in presence. She savored each bite, noticing how her body responded, appreciating the connection between nourishment and energy. Subtle, consistent choices, movement, hydration, mindful meals, and reflection reinforced one another, creating a quiet yet profound impact on her overall well-being. By bedtime, Carol sat in her favorite chair by the window, sipping chamomile tea, watching the stars appear one by one in the deepening sky. The day had passed gently, but its influence was clear, consistent. Mindful attention to small actions created a ripple effect that touched energy, mood, and clarity. She felt calm, empowered, and connected to her own rhythms. Life, she reflected, doesn't demand dramatic changes. It responds to patience, attentiveness, and small, repeated gestures that honor the body and mind. The fragrance of cinnamon, the feel of soil, the taste of a simple meal, these small moments, when noticed and respected, accumulate into subtle but lasting shifts. The first light of dawn spilled through the curtains, painting the bedroom in soft shades of gold and rose. She lingered by the window, feeling the cool morning air brush her cheeks, and let herself simply exist in that quiet pause. Outside, birds moved through the trees, their calls crisp and fleeting, reminding her of rhythms larger than herself. There was a comfort in noticing, in letting moments arrive fully before rushing into the day. Her name could have been Diane, a retired schoolteacher who had devoted decades to shaping young minds. Now, she devoted that same attentiveness inward, observing her body and its gentle, sometimes imperceptible cues. Over recent months, she noticed subtle shifts: occasional fatigue after routine chores, a mild bloating after meals, and fleeting moments of mental fog. These signs weren't urgent, yet they spoke softly, insisting she pay attention. Many seniors encounter these subtle nudges from their bodies. According to multiple studies, liver function naturally evolves with age. Its role in energy metabolism, detoxification, and nutrient processing means that small inefficiencies may show as fatigue, digestive changes, or minor shifts in energy. These whispers are not emergencies, but invitations, gentle prompts to respond with care and awareness. Diane poured herself a warm cup of herbal tea, inhaling its soothing aroma. Hydration, though simple, plays a critical role in supporting circulation, digestion, and liver function. Sipping mindfully transformed an ordinary act into a ritual of attentiveness, a small but meaningful conversation with her body. The warmth, aroma, and calm of the ritual reminded her that care doesn't always require complexity, just presence. After breakfast, she went for a slow walk around her neighborhood. The air smelled faintly of wet leaves, and the distant hum of morning activity punctuated the quiet. Every step became a practice in observation, noticing how her body responded, how muscles engaged, how her breath deepened. Gentle movement, even in small doses, supports circulation, flexibility, and energy over time. Diane recognized that movement wasn't about intensity or speed, but about listening, adjusting, and engaging with awareness. She returned home and prepared a simple, nourishing lunch: roasted vegetables with quinoa and a portion of lean protein. She chopped, stirred, and tasted, allowing herself to notice flavors, textures, and the subtle shifts in energy that came from mindful eating. According to research, consistent, nutrient-rich meals support liver function, energy balance, and overall well-being. Diane realized that repeated small choices often create larger impacts than rare, dramatic interventions. In the afternoon, Diane tended to her small balcony garden. She watered herbs and potted plants, noticing the gentle resistance of soil, the scent of fresh leaves, and the quiet growth of greenery. Gardening became more than a pastime. It was an act of attentiveness, movement, and connection. Each small task reinforced the rhythm of daily life, promoting subtle but meaningful improvements in energy, mood, and physical health. Later, she journaled briefly, recording observations from her day. Writing down subtle changes in energy, digestion, or mood allowed her to notice patterns she might otherwise overlook. Journaling became a quiet form of empowerment, a way to track progress, celebrate consistency, and honor small steps that collectively supported her well-being. As evening approached, Diane prepared a light, flavorful dinner, appreciating each step of the process. She reflected on how the acts of hydration, mindful eating, gentle movement, and creative engagement had intertwined throughout her day. Each habit, though modest on its own, had accumulated into a day rich in attentiveness, energy, and subtle vitality. By nightfall, Diane sat by the window, sipping chamomile tea, watching the sky darken and the first stars appear. She felt grounded, connected, and empowered by the small, repeated actions that had defined her day. Life, she understood, didn't require extreme measures or sudden transformations. It responded to gentle, consistent choices made with awareness and care. The wind rustled outside, carrying the faint scent of evening blooms. Diane smiled softly, realizing that small, mindful gestures, walking, sipping water, tending plants, preparing meals, observing her body, could ripple outward, shaping energy, mood, and overall vitality in profound ways. The smell of coffee lingered in the air, mingling with the faint scent of rain from the open window. She leaned against the counter, holding her mug between her hands, feeling its warmth seep into her fingers. The world outside was waking slowly, the streets glistening faintly from the overnight drizzle, and there was a quiet stillness that seemed to stretch time itself. Her name could have been Linda, a retired journalist who had spent decades chasing deadlines and stories, always observing, always listening. Now, she turned that same attentiveness inward, noticing subtle rhythms of her own body that she had once overlooked. She felt small shifts, a touch of fatigue after routine activities, a gentle bloating after meals, fleeting moments of mental haze. Nothing urgent, but enough to make her pause and reflect. Many seniors encounter these quiet nudges. According to multiple studies, liver function evolves gradually with age. Its role in energy regulation, detoxification, and nutrient processing means that small inefficiencies can appear as mild fatigue, slower digestion, or minor energy dips. These signals aren't emergencies. They are invitations to mindfulness, consistency, and gentle adjustments. Linda took a slow sip of her coffee, appreciating the aroma, warmth, and comfort it brought. Hydration, even in simple forms like tea or coffee, plays a subtle role in maintaining circulation, digestion, and liver support. Being present during such ordinary acts transformed them into mindful rituals, small gestures of care with cumulative benefits. After breakfast, she went for a walk along the neighborhood path. The ground was slick from rain, but the cool air felt refreshing. Each step was deliberate, each breath observed. Gentle movement, repeated consistently, improved circulation, energy, and flexibility over time. Linda recognized that wellness wasn't about intensity, but attentiveness, listening to her body and responding with kindness and patience. Returning home, she prepared a balanced, nourishing lunch: fresh vegetables, lean protein, and a small portion of whole grains filled her plate. She ate slowly, noticing textures, aromas, and subtle shifts in how her body responded. Studies show that consistent, nutrient-rich choices support liver function, digestion, and overall vitality. Linda realized that small, mindful choices often mattered more than dramatic or sporadic interventions. In the afternoon, she tended to her indoor plants. She watered them carefully, pruned leaves, and noticed the soft resistance of soil beneath her fingers. Gardening was more than a hobby. It was a practice in mindfulness, gentle movement, and connection to life's rhythms. Each small action, repeated day after day, supported both mental clarity and subtle physical vitality. Later, she sat with a journal, reflecting on the day. Writing allowed her to observe patterns in energy, digestion, and mood. It became a quiet dialogue with herself, a way to track subtle changes, celebrate consistency, and honor the small steps that collectively shaped her well-being. Journaling, Linda realized, was a tool not only for awareness but also for empowerment. By evening, Linda prepared a simple dinner, appreciating the colors, textures, and aromas of her ingredients. She noted how each mindful act, hydrating, walking, eating attentively, tending plants, journaling, accumulated into a day that felt full of energy, presence, and subtle vitality. These small, repeated gestures created a foundation for long-term wellness that was steady, sustainable, and deeply personal. As night fell, she sat by the window with a warm cup of tea, listening to the faint patter of rain outside. She reflected on how small, consistent actions had shifted her energy and mood. The acts of attention, repetition, and care, even when quiet and unassuming, had the power to ripple through her day, influencing both body and mind. Life, Linda understood, responds not to dramatic change but to persistent, thoughtful attentiveness. Small choices, when made with awareness and consistency, ripple outward, creating meaningful, lasting shifts in vitality, energy, and presence. The evening sky glowed in deep amber and violet, streaked with wisps of cloud as the sun dipped below the horizon. She sat on the porch, wrapped in a soft blanket, the faint scent of jasmine drifting from nearby bushes. The quiet hum of crickets mixed with distant traffic, creating a rhythm that was both grounding and soothing. It was a moment of reflection, one that carried more weight than any hurried day ever could. Her name could have been Margaret, a retired teacher and grandmother who had spent decades caring for others, shaping minds, and nurturing hearts. Now, in her later years, she turned that attentiveness inward, paying attention to the subtle rhythms of her body. Over time, she had noticed small, persistent signals: occasional fatigue after routine tasks, mild digestive discomfort, slight heaviness after meals, fleeting moments of mental fog. None were alarming, but each whispered a reminder: care matters, attention matters, small shifts matter. Many seniors encounter similar patterns. According to numerous studies, liver function and overall metabolism evolve gradually with age. The liver's role in energy regulation, detoxification, and nutrient processing means even minor inefficiencies can manifest as fatigue, digestive changes, or subtle energy dips. These are not emergencies, but gentle prompts for reflection, awareness, and small, sustainable adjustments. Margaret poured herself a cup of chamomile tea, noticing the warmth of the mug in her hands and the soothing aroma rising to her nose. Hydration, though deceptively simple, supports digestion, circulation, and liver function. Being mindful while sipping, noticing the warmth, the flavor, and the comfort it brought transformed a routine act into a ritual of care. Even small gestures, repeated consistently, had the power to ripple outward, influencing energy, mood, and resilience. She rose and walked slowly to her small garden, where the evening air carried the faint scent of earth and flowers. She bent to prune a few plants and gently watered the soil. Each movement was deliberate, each breath intentional. Gentle, mindful activity, repeated daily, fosters circulation, flexibility, and a subtle sense of vitality. Margaret reflected on how these moments of presence, though simple, were quietly shaping her overall well-being. Returning indoors, she prepared a light dinner, a mix of vegetables, whole grains, and a modest portion of protein. She chopped and stirred, observing colors, aromas, and textures. Eating mindfully, she noticed how her body responded, how energy shifted subtly, and how small choices compounded over time. Research shows that consistent, nutrient-rich meals support liver function, digestion, and long-term vitality. Margaret understood that wellness was rarely about dramatic interventions. It was about repetition, attentiveness, and small, deliberate actions. After dinner, she took a few minutes to journal. She recorded observations about her energy, digestion, and moods, reflecting on what had felt different or better over recent weeks. Journaling became both a mirror and a map, a way to recognize progress, understand patterns, and celebrate consistency. It reminded her that small, intentional efforts accumulate quietly but powerfully, shaping both body and mind. By the time night fully fell, Margaret sat wrapped in her blanket once more, sipping tea, feeling the gentle rhythm of her body, and noticing the calm in her mind. The acts of hydration, gentle movement, mindful meals, journaling, and presence had compounded over time, creating subtle but meaningful shifts in energy, mood, and perspective. She felt empowered, grounded, and connected not to dramatic results, but to the quiet, consistent care she had given herself each day. Margaret reflected on the journey of small choices repeated over weeks and months. The walks, the mindful meals, the hydration, the tending of plants, the journaling. She realized that wellness isn't a single action, a miracle fix, or a dramatic transformation. It is the patient accumulation of small, thoughtful actions, gentle, consistent, and attentive gestures that ripple through every part of life. She looked at the darkening sky, stars beginning to peek through, and felt a profound sense of peace. Life, she understood, responds not to urgency, but to consistent, mindful care. Each small choice made with intention creates momentum that carries forward, influencing energy, mood, and vitality in ways that may seem subtle in the moment, but powerful in retrospect. Have you ever noticed how small changes sometimes shift everything?